Welcome to Season 6 of the Hey Girl podcast with your host and my mom, Bethany Needham. This season, we get to hear stories from guests who are running their race in their place right where God has them. We hope that these stories will encourage and inspire you to do the same. If you want more information or to connect with my mom, go follow us on Instagram at HeyGirlGram, friend us on Facebook at HeyGirlPod, or even better, head to BethanyNeedham.com and sign up for our email list so that you can get all the Hey Girl tea. All right, it's time to grab a cup of coffee or your favorite seltzer. Here's my mom.
Hey girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Hey Girl podcast. This week, I sit down with Sarah Symonds from Grace in Your Space. If you have never checked out her Instagram or blog, for sure go do that. You can find all the links in the show notes. But before we get to this episode, a couple of quick reminders. First, August, we are taking a summer break, so don't panic. We will be back in September. I cannot wait for you to hear the episodes we have already lined up for that. But you still got a couple of weeks of stories that are so fantastic. Y'all, last but not least, Hey Girl Fitness. We have some fun things going on right now, and I would love for you to be a part. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Go to my website, BethanyNeedham.com, check out Hey Girl Fitness. We have a group going right now that's doing a nutrition challenge that I am not going to lie. I have been on now for a week and a couple of days, and I feel incredible, like so much better than I felt in so long. And if you want to jump in on this, it is not too late. So head on over to the website. We would love to have you join us. If not this, there's a workout we're doing together. It is just a fun community. I love these women. So again, go to BethanyNeedham.com/HeyGirlFitness or /fitness. I don't even know my own website. That's terrible. But go to my website, click on Hey Girl Fitness, check it out. We'd love to have you join us. Remember our summer break, and finally grab that seltzer. Ooh, it's a hot day here today. Maybe grab some ice cream because I can't wait for you to hear this conversation and this story from Sarah Symonds. All right. I am so excited, ladies, because today I get to introduce you to Sarah Symonds, who this is my first time meeting you face to face, but I've kind of been obsessing over your Instagram. True story. But welcome to Hey Girl Podcast, Sarah.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, so excited to hear your story, even just to point people towards what you do. If anyone's like me and finding, this is going to sound cheesy, but finding Instagram pages that are something that when you look at it, you leave just feeling warm and happy and inspired. And you have one of those. I think that that's such a gift. And so we'll get to all of that, but why don't we start with you just introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about you?
Sure. So let me preface this by saying when you first invited me to become a guest, I was very excited, but I was also like, I wonder what we're going to talk about because in my mind, my story is just really kind of vanilla. It's a little plain, kind of unremarkable. You know, I've listened to your past guests and I'm like, wow, like their story is so inspiring. But then the Lord kind of just impressed on me, like, maybe there's just lots of people out there who have plain vanilla stories that can relate to it. So, with that in mind, I kind of grew up in a transient mode. My dad was in the Air Force, career military, and so we moved a lot as a kid. I think until I was 10, we moved every year or two. And so we were constantly going to new places. My mother was amazing at creating a home out of any new place that we were at, whether it was an apartment for 2 months until we could get into base housing, or actually in base housing, or in a home that we were renting or owning. Lots of different experiences with home and what that looks like in my formative years. Um, And then when I turned 10, my dad retired from the military and we moved to Michigan, which is where I live now, though not in the same place that we moved to when he got his first job outside of the military. And I was there for 6 years. And 6 years is a really long time to be in one place when you're used to moving every single year. So I feel like that that place was where I really learned, like as a person, how to build friendships and keep them and not just say goodbye after a year. It was the first place that I really found a
Yeah.
community. It was the first place that I found the Lord. A wonderful friend at the age of 10 invited me to come to church, and I was like, oh, okay. And found the Lord and became a Jesus follower a couple of years into that journey. And so that was a really, I think, foundational place for what kind of set up the rest of my journey in my life. And then at the age of 16, not a wonderful age, we found out we had to move again. And so we
Mm.
ended up moving a couple of hours south for my dad. He got a new job, and we had to move. And so, kind of picturing, like looking back at my life, I'm like, okay, well, it was a bit transient for 10 years. Then it was like the first place that I felt a sense of belonging. And I'm at the wonderful, lovely age of 16. And my parents tell me that they have to uproot us again. And you know how 16-year-olds are. It wasn't a wonderful time of life. I definitely felt like life was ending. Um, and it sounds dramatic, but looking back at it, like those were real feelings, you know? And so I was not very nice to my parents. I apologize, mom and dad. It's a bit of a interesting experience to look at that time of life, but moved to a couple hours south. And that is where I feel like the Lord just really redeemed everything that I thought that I had lost, which is a wonderful gift. Got into a new church, a new community. He gave me a core group of friends right away, which is really important as a teen. And then I fell in love with my husband. And so just kind of looking back at that journey, it was very volatile, challenging, learned a lot just in a very young age, and then thought my life was ending. But it was really the beginning of the journey for my entire adult life, which is kind of cool to look back and see, you know?
I, first of all, I just love so much of what you just shared. Even just your kind of that perspective of, I feel like I have a vanilla story. And I love that God spoke to your heart in terms of sharing your story, because the amount of people that I talk to that feel that way blows my mind, in terms of people that just like, well, I don't really think I have anything worth sharing.
Sure.
And I kind of, it's bold to say, but I will say, I think part of the enemy's work is that kind of planting that lie, of it's sort of a not enough lie,
Yep,
right? Like, I don't have
it is.
enough of a story. And yeah, I just look at your life in just from a distance and think of all of the people that have already been impacted, the work that you're doing. And I'm like, girlfriend, it's not a, it's like, one, your story does matter because it's God's writing it, and what a beautiful thing. And secondly, I do think we just never know who our story is going to speak to. Like
Mhm.
that other young woman that's out there that's like, oh, I've been feeling the same way. And so having you get to share, and total side note, but I have to say this, I relate so much with you on the I was 16 when my dad is like, he was a pastor. He's like, so I'm finishing up at this church and we're moving to Maine. We were in Canada at the time.
Oh my goodness.
And I totally get that, like, that feeling of my life is over. Like,
Absolutely.
this is the worst because, 16-year-old girls are not dramatic at all. But similar to you, that I would look back and say that decision, that move is what God used. Like, I met my husband
Mhm.
not too long after that move. So, what a cool part of your story, how God took something that in the moment seemed catastrophic, and then to be able to look back and see the beauty of that. How old were you when you met your husband?
I was 16, and we were good friends for a couple of years. And then, right as I was going off to college, he's a year older than me. Um, we started dating. And so it was a beautiful part of the story because, if we hadn't moved, I would not have met him or potentially would have delayed meeting him. You don't know. You don't know how the Lord could work in that. But um so yeah, we started dating right as I was going off to college, dated for 3 years and got married at the puppy stage of 21 and 22 and have been married for almost 17 years now. So we have two kiddos and we're entering the preteen years, which are terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. Um, and now
Yes.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying I absolutely agree.
Oh, yes.
It's terrifying and wonderful.
It is. It's, every stage has its challenge. But every stage also has these amazing blessings. And I'm really loving this age. They're independent. You can have a conversation that is intelligent with them, and you're teaching them so much at this age. And so it's a really fun stage.
So, as somebody who, like you mentioned, you didn't come to faith until your teen years, do you feel like that has influenced at all in terms of how you parent, just from a faith, from having this relationship with Jesus and parenting your kids from their childhood? Because I think about that sometimes. I obviously grew up in a Christian family, so it was kind of always sort of there. But
Mhm.
if your childhood memories don't hold that, like, what did that look like for you kind of navigating parenting through those years?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because I didn't have that like super strong biblical background until I was probably 12. But my husband grew up in the church and, has been memorizing verses since the early days of preschool Awana. And so the two of us coming together is a really beautiful thing because he has that um, biblical foundation. He has a lot of knowledge, and he is able to kind of teach the kids from that perspective. And I have the perspective of somebody who learned it at an older age, so I can relate better to people who don't have that built into them from their very early years. Um, and I can also appreciate the fact that what I knew before and what I knew after was different. So a lot of people when they grow up in the
Yeah.
church, they don't have that really like dramatic sense of change because it's all they've ever known. And so I think that
Yeah.
from a parenting standpoint is really valuable to be able to say I know what it was like without Christ and I know what it's like with him. I'm telling you this part's better. And um my kids obviously are having that same experience as my husband where they've known the Lord, they've known being in church since they were babies. And so I hope that part of my parenting is teaching them to be compassionate, to be um, merciful, to be
Mm.
patient with people who don't have the same beliefs as them, and to help them understand that their role can be building up and bringing people along in a journey towards a relationship with Christ. Because there's lots of people that don't know him and that need that person to be the shoulder, to cry on and to work alongside of other people.
Oh, that is beautiful. I was thinking when you were sharing about your coming to church, like basically at 10 years old, a friend inviting you to church, and what a like obviously changed everything for you.
Mhm.
And it's as you're talking, I'm like, what a just such a beautiful picture of God using all of that to now shape you and how you raise your kids, of an awareness of kids who don't know Jesus. Cause it can be easy. I think I struggled with this when I had little kids, to want to protect your kids from
Mhm.
outside influences and like how many different church programs and everything. And I'm not bashing that at all. I think, obviously your husband was a cubby, I'm guessing, in Awana.
Yep.
So, nothing wrong with that, but also, like, what does it look like for us to cultivate in our children an awareness and a heart for the lost from a very
Absolutely.
young age? Like, Jesus, a lot of kids don't. Like, there are a lot of people around this world that don't. So, how do we, as a family, reach those people? And such a cool testimony for you of how God used, the 10 years or 12 years or whatever that you walked without him,
Mhm.
to be able to then just have that deeper empathy and understanding for, okay, I needed to be reached, and so do all of these other people.
Right, exactly. And there's so many out there who have a similar story or who even come to know the Lord at a much later age. I mean, 12 is still pretty formative and still grew up then with a lot of guidance in the church through my teen years. But there's a lot of people who don't know the Lord until late adulthood. And so it is. It's a wonderful perspective, I think, to be able to share with the kids and even just to explain, why people act the way that they do when they're not used to seeing certain behaviors and things. It's just a really great way to have those conversations and bring the Lord and his redemption into it and having that perspective just to walk them through a very difficult world.
Oh, absolutely. I just think too, as somebody who, and this is just me straight up confessing my own shortcomings here, is I often think of mission evangelism in terms of people who are grown, who are either adults, whatever that sort of age group. But there is a part of me that's like, man, I do think we probably don't talk about evangelism. I'm talking even outside the church, to children. Like, how do we
Mhm.
teach our kids to reach other kids?
Yeah.
Is I don't know. Again, as I'm processing this, I'm like, I think I probably have thought too much about, again, protecting my kids rather than sending them in some ways. Like,
Sure.
it's
And
yeah.
it's cool
I love that you're
because,
doing.
well, I'm actually a product, if you want to look at it that way, of a child missionary. My first experience with
Yeah.
church was because a 10-year-old invited me to come with her to her church. So I think that's really cool. Kudos to her.
Yeah. I know, right? It kind of makes you want to be like, all right, everyone listening that has younger kids, like maybe it's a good gut check for us. When is the last time our kids invited another kid to join them,
Yeah.
church, youth group, Awana, whatever it is? Like,
Yeah.
are we encouraging that in our kids? Because usually that's also that involves us, right? Anything our kids commit to
Sure.
involve commitment from us.
It
So
does.
sometimes we're like, can you not like promise all of my time? But usually it means you're picking this kid up, you're having a conversation with a parent. Like,
Yep.
but are we doing that as parents? What a cool thing for that to be your story, but also your testimony of, hey, this God works through children, not just grown-up missionaries, but missionary children. So,
Absolutely. And
I
it's
love it.
interesting because, like you said, I mean, it does involve a lot of adult time. And even in that family, I was over at her house all the time, and I got to know her mom and her grandma became kind of like a pseudo grandma to me because I didn't have any. My grandparents weren't close; they're all 10 hours away, and so it's cool to look back and see the impact that child had in my life. But it's also cool to look at the opportunities that it would be giving our kids to learn how to just be that person who is always inviting and always trying to share their testimony or their story with whoever they're with. I mean, if we start that mentality when they're young, then it becomes a part of them, and it makes it easier for them as adults to then extend the Great
Yeah.
Commission. So
That's yeah, 100%. And so I wonder then, let's shift gears. You came to know Christ as a kid, or what a beautiful story of another child reaching out to you. What has this journey looked like for you in terms of just your own race, how God has worked through your life these last years since coming to know him?
yeah, I think that that's kind of where the vanilla feeling kind of came in, because my childhood wasn't typical. Moving every year is not typical, but once I came to know him, it was very much kind of a youth group focus in church. Was there every Sunday, every Wednesday, did all the missions trips, and those are all wonderful, beautiful things. Um, but I feel like the more impactful parts of my testimony is just sitting down one on one with somebody and just having plain old conversations and diving into the things that everybody's struggling with, and not having to feel like I have a Sunday school answer on hand, because everybody has questions. And I think that more often than not,
Mhm.
your biggest work can be in a one on one situation rather than speaking to the masses, which of course has its value too. And I am able to do that as part of my platform as well, which is a blessing. But yeah, I would say that my greatest work is more on a one-on-one level. So I just always like to point that out, because sometimes people overlook if they don't have a platform. For people like me looking back, those one-on-one conversations were what grew me in my faith and progressed me to become closer to the Lord. It wasn't typically a sermon that I listened to on a Sunday. It was usually sitting down and having a conversation, and they're really valuable.
And that's such a cool testimony to hear from you as well, because it will obviously kind of move into this, but a big part of your story and your race right now is having a larger platform. Like
Mhm.
it is part of your race, but also to know that that is not one where it started.
True.
And yeah, to kind of see the not just progression, but where God has really done that deep work. So I'm this has come up a lot in conversation recently, even in some interviews, this idea of how it, especially when you think about big platforms or the place that God has us, that it wasn't just I was here and then I blinked and now I'm over here. Like there's kind of this journey of a step and then another step and another one. So maybe you could walk me through, I would love to know from that sort of, obviously you're walking with Jesus. You just mentioned having these conversations. What were kind of the steps that stand out to you that led to where God has you right now in your journey?
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't really even get into that part of my story yet, but after college, I worked at a university for 8 years doing admissions and marketing at a Christian university, the same, my alma mater. And so that was a wonderful time of just steady growth as an adult. It was my child rearing years. And so a lot of just like normal life happened in those 8 years. And then I felt the Lord tugging on me to stay home with my kids. And so I did for a couple of years, and then they went off to school. And I kind of just felt that need to have something of my own again, something that I could kind of claim and work towards and have a goal outside of changing diapers.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because now my business is called Grace in My Space. I have a blog, I do social media. Most people would label me an influencer, which is fine as long as the influence is good, but I'm still not a huge fan of the term. Um, and I've been doing this for about 7 years. But at the beginning, there was no aspiration to become a big influencer. Um, I was literally sitting on my couch after bedtime, scrolling Instagram for my own pleasure, and just kept noticing that people were making a living on social media. And this is back when influencers were not normal. This was way before it became a viable career. It was way before it was normal to follow an influencer. Um, and so I was just kind of curious because they were all, I followed accounts that did home decor because that's what I love. You know, growing up, moving so much, watching my mom be able to create a home in less than a year, with every new home that we moved to, that is where a lot of my love for this came from. And so I kind of looked at it and I said, I could do that. And so I did. And it was just a really uninspiring, not aspirational way to get into it. It was just a need to claim something as my own. And so I tried it and I fumbled a lot in the beginning. I had no idea what I was doing. There was very few other people doing it. So I didn't even have a resource to go to say, hey, how does this work? But I kind of think that's a little bit what's beautiful about just the way that I got into this, is because the Lord just made it happen. Like, that's how I feel about growing Grace in My Space to the point that it's at now. It was just a blessing from the Lord. And through the last 7 years, it has grown to be large enough that there is a platform there. And I do get to speak to thousands of people whenever I want to on a daily basis. And sharing my own personal story has never really been a part of that. It's been mostly focused on creating a home, interior design, how to do DIY and actually have the confidence to just try, even if you fail. Um, and then faith was the only, personal aspect that I would share, is just my faith in Christ and what that means to me and how it helps me through the hard times, without getting into very specific personal details that I just try to protect my family from with a large platform.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to see how the Lord has grown it and worked in it when none of this was ever in my plans.
It's so interesting, the conversation. So I've had a handful of conversations with women who have different styles but similar platforms of,
Mhm.
social media, blogs, etc. And I'm not exaggerating to say 100% of them that I have spoken to have that same kind of journey, I guess, of I just sort of started. It was messy. I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I did not foresee what God was going to do with this. I just did the next thing. Like we were talking about that, kind of offline earlier, is did the next right thing. And even just the thing, the best that I knew, which wasn't even always necessarily quote unquote the right thing. It just was, I didn't know what to do. So
Yep.
I love those stories because it's such a testimony of how God is working in spaces oftentimes that feel so mundane and messy, and we feel like we don't really know what's going on, but he is doing this work that over time we can often look back and be like, wow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like, how incredible is that?
Isn't that cool? That's my
But
favorite part. Just love looking back and seeing, when you're in the middle of something, you can't tell what's happening. You know what I mean? You're just too close to it, or you don't have maybe the faith sometimes to see what could come of something. But always looking back,
mm,
you can see the Lord's hand in every step, even those steps when you feel like you were falling.
oh, absolutely. It's interesting you're talking about that social media, the term influencer, and how it's an awkward term, right? Like it's kind
It
of
is.
a strange, but as you were saying it, the word that came to mind, and this is you as a believer, is really you're what all of us should be, which is you are an ambassador, and you're an ambassador of Christ, and your platform happens to be blogging and social media.
Mhm.
And for our listeners that maybe they're like, I could never do what she does. Like, okay, maybe not, maybe it's not your gift to do a social media and blog that's about creating these beautiful spaces. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you're an ambassador, which means
Absolutely.
everyone in your sphere of influence is your mission field, and kind of taking the time to think about what might God want to use. And maybe it's like where you were at the beginning, maybe it's something that you don't even realize that God wants to um, use from even your past, like your mom making your house into a home, and how that has obviously influenced who you are and the gifts that you have, like something like that, or something in your life that you're like, no, he couldn't use this, like it's just not enough. And God's like, hey, I took a couple of fish, some loaves, and fed a whole bunch of people, like
Oh yeah.
put it in my hands, watch what I can do.
Yep.
And yeah, you're just, I love that that's a big part of your story, is that you use what God gave you, you stepped into it, you were faithful with it. And again, it's not even like the story's over. Like this is just where you're at right now in the story,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
incredible to think. Who knows? Who knows what he has?
I know.
So let's talk about right now. What does life look like, out of curiosity, for like a blogger, Instagram, ambassador of Christ, whatever title we want to throw on this?
Uh-huh.
What does that actually practically look like day to day and walking with Jesus in this?
Sure. So it's an ever evolving storyline, I feel like. Um, because there's a lot of moving pieces to it. There's a lot of layers. There is the personal side of things where my home is actually my job, sharing my home, sharing what I'm doing in my home is my job. So there's this level of care to that. Just wanting to protect my family and the way that we live in our home and still make it viable to share with thousands of strangers every day. So that's a little complicated, but a large part of how I make my decisions on what to share. And so my blog is very much kind of like a tutorial editorial style blog where it's pretty factual and down to brass tacks. And this is how you can do XYZ to implement it into your home. And then there's the other side of it, which is social media. I'm on Instagram and YouTube primarily. I have other accounts, but that's just a lot of time. So I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
really participate on TikTok or some of the other more popular ones. But that side of it is a lot more relational and just trying to connect with the people that I'm talking to kind of dive into, what you're probably feeling intimidated to try and paint that wall some random color. So here's how you get the confidence to take a risk and to not be afraid of failure and to just learn how to create a haven in your home. And a lot of that confidence for me comes in knowing like my worth in the Lord and that my worth doesn't come from the way my home looks or the way my followers perceive me, and trying to share that side of it too. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
day to day, it's very much just focused on what I'm doing in my home. How can I share it with my followers so that they are benefited, both from a practical standpoint, but also from, like the whole spiritual, emotional, you're a human side of it too. Um, so there's all of that that just goes into like daily content. And then there's the actual creation with video editing and photography and writing styles and all the editing that goes into having a website and building. I built my website myself. Like, I am the only person that works on my business besides my dear friend who does graphic roundups and some of my recipes for me. So it's all inclusive and it's a lot of work. But it's a really cool blessing as well. It's every job has its ups and downs, and this is no different than any other job, really.
Absolutely. And I just love, again, the testimony for people listening of just another picture of how God can use our jobs, the things that we do, not just to support part of provision for our family, but that this is also part of your mission field,
Mhm.
and how he's reaching people through your life. And I don't know, I can't say it enough. If people are listening and they are at all, if they're on Instagram, if they, maybe they're not and they want to go check out your blog, it really is the work that you do. I love doing interior design. It's only once in a great while that I'll come across someone that's like, I would hand over the keys to this person and be like, you could do my house for me. And you have easily made the list, Sarah,
Oh,
easily.
thank you.
So
Appreciate that. It's interesting
so
though, what
just
you
as,
said. Yeah, I was
yeah,
just
go ahead.
it's interesting when you said that you have people saying I could never do that job, right? A lot of people look at what I do and they say I could never do that job. And I am like, yeah, I get that. Some days I don't know how I do this job. But then I also look at other people with, quote unquote typical jobs, say a teacher, and I say, I don't know how you do that job. I could not do that job. And so I just feel like that is worth saying, that it's the giftings that the Lord has given you and where He has
Hmm.
placed you that allow you to do what you do and allow other people to do what they do. It's not me doing this job because I'm so wonderful. It's the giftings that the Lord has given me and the opportunities that He's blessed me with that allow it to happen.
Oh, preach. I was just reading in First Corinthians in chapter 12, where it talks about the different gifts, that basically how the church is made up of. It's one body, but it has all different parts and each part playing its part.
Yep.
And that is something that's such a passion point for me, probably because I have struggled with it so much, is finding my part. Like, okay, God, what part have you given me to play? And it's almost ironic to say this because we're obviously talking about your ministry and your platform involves social media. But I do think there's a side where for some of us, we need to take less time on social media and
Oh, yeah.
looking at what other people are doing, and stop thinking so much about other people's gifts and wow, that looks cooler, that look, and spend some time with Jesus in the quiet spaces and God, what have you given me to do? Because just like you said, in that space, even if whatever it is might feel overwhelming, when God's called you to it, like your life right now, Sarah is an example, when God's called you to it, all of those spaces we may feel inadequate, like he has more than enough to
Yeah.
fill in those gaps. And just what he is able to do when we surrender what he's given us and we use that in service to him instead of trying to be somebody else. Like Corinthians says that, right? Like, don't be the hand looking at the foot. being
Yep.
like, oh, I want that job, or vice versa. Like, if you're the hand, be the hand, do your part. And that starts with really, at least in my life for sure, is spending enough time with God and knowing who I am in Him to be able to embrace what is my part to play in this. So,
Well said. Yes, I totally agree.
well, Miss Sarah, before we wrap up, I would love to ask you, because obviously we've talked a lot about just what you do in terms of your business, the blog, Instagram, but for you and your relationship with Jesus, what is something that every day or on a regular basis that you find is your just special space to connect with God, to keep that relationship thriving?
I love that question because it'll be so different for everyone. For me, I love worship. I love singing, and that's a really special thing. I do love to do it corporately, but just me and the Lord. Sometimes in the car driving to get the kids, like that's the best time of day. Just you know, singing His praises, and then obviously being in the word is a huge part of it, but I feel like as I have grown into adulthood and have had different challenges through life, having a community of believers around me has been one of the more impactful situations. Like I was talking about, just sitting down and having one-on-one conversations. While hopefully I'm being an encouragement to other people, they are encouraging me right back. And so that's a huge part. That
Mm.
community is such a huge part of what I need as a church body member. But I think also a huge thing that's missing these days. And so I would totally encourage people, if you are feeling a little, not necessarily wayward, but distant or needing that connection, get a group around you because it will be a game changer of mature,
Mm.
believing Christians who can help build you up. I do feel like that's a caveat because you can easily walk into any church and be surrounded, but find your people, find the people that can come alongside.
Oh, that is a good word, especially this is probably, I don't know, I've only been alive for as long as I've been alive, but in a very long time that I can remember, this is such a time in our life in this world where people just need community. They need
Yes.
people. And so, yeah, I appreciate that word so much. Sarah, this has been such a treat. Thank you so much for just sharing your story, for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be asked. I really appreciate you having me.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to listen today. You make every hour spent recording in this closet worth it. Also, a huge thanks to Tony from IOK Productions for stepping in as our new editor and making all of those hours recording sound incredible. I can't wait to do this again next week. Bye, girl.